Chapter 24. The drunken Chin Kang makes light of lucre and shows a preference for generosity. The foolish girl mislays her handkerchief and arouses mutual thoughts. But to return to our narrative, Lin Daiyu's sentimental reflections were the while reeling and raveling in an intricate maze, when unexpectedly someone from behind gave her a tap saying, "What are you up to all alone here?" Which took Lin Daiyu so much by surprise that she gave a start, and turning her head round to look and noticing that it was Xiangling and no one else. "You stupid girl," Lin Daiyu replied. "You've given me such a fright. But where do you come from at this time?" Xiangling giggled and smirked. "I've come," she added, "in search of our young lady, but I can't find her anywhere. But your Tzu-chuan is also looking after you. And she says that Lady Secunda has sent a present to you of some tea. But you had better go back home and sit down." As she spoke, she took Daiyu by the hand, and they came along back to the Shaoxiang Quan, where Lady Fing had indeed sent her 2 small caddies of a new seasoned tea, of superior quality. But Lin Daiyu sat down, in company with Xiangling, and began to converse on the merits of this tapestry and the fineness of that embroidery. And after they had also had a game at chess, and read a few sentences out of a book, Xiangling took her departure. But we need not speak of either of them, but return now to Baoyu. Having been found and brought back home by Shijin, he discovered Yuan Yang reclining on the bed, in the act of examining Shijin's needlework. But when she perceived Baoyu arrive, she forthwith remarked, "Where have you been?" "Her venerable ladyship is waiting for you to tell you to go over and pay your obeisance to our senior master, and don't you still make haste to go and change your clothes and be off." Shijin at once walked into the room to fetch his clothes, and Baoyu sat on the edge of the bed and pushed his shoes off with his toes. And, while waiting for his boots to put them on, he turned round and perceiving that Yuan Yang, who was clad in a light red silk jacket and a green satin waistcoat, and girdled with a white crepe sash, had her face turned the other way, and her head lowered, giving her attention to the criticism of the needlework, while round her neck she wore a collar with embroidery. Baoyu readily pressed his face against the nape of her neck, and as he sniffed the perfume about it, he did not stay his hand from stroking her neck, which in whiteness and smoothness was not below that of Shijin. And as he approached her, "My dear girl," he said smiling, and with a driveling face, "do let me lick the cosmetic off your mouth," clinging to her person, as he uttered these words like twisted sweetmeat. "Shijin!" cried Yuan Yang at once. "Come out and see. You've been with him a whole lifetime, and don't you give him any advice? But let him still behave in this fashion." Whereupon, Shijin walked out, clasping the clothes and turning to Baoyu. She observed, "I advise you in this way and it's no good. I advise you in that way and you don't mend. And what do you mean to do after all? But if you again behave like this, it will then, in fact, be impossible for me to live any longer in this place." As she tendered these words of counsel, she urged him to put his clothes on, and after he had changed, he betook himself, along with Yuan Yang, to the front part of the mansion, and bade goodbye to Dowager Lady Chia. After which he went outside, where the attendants and horses were all in readiness. But when he was about to mount his steed, he perceived Chia lean back from his visit, and in the act of dismounting. And as the two of them stood face to face, and mutually exchanged some inquiries, they saw someone come round from the side and say, "My respects to you, Uncle Baoyu." When Baoyu came to look at him, he noticed that this person had an oblong face, that his body was tall and lanky, that his age was only 18 or 19, and that he possessed, in real truth, an air of refinement and elegance. But though his features were, after all, exceedingly familiar, he could not recall to mind to what branch of the family he belonged, and what his name was. "What are you staring vacantly for?" Qialin inquired, laughing. "Don't you even recognize him? He's Yun the son of our 5th sister-in-law, who lives in the back court." "Of course," Baoyu assented complacently. "How is it that I had forgotten just now?" And having gone on to ask how his mother was, and what work he had to do at present, "I've come in search of Uncle Secundus to tell him something," Chia Yun replied, as he pointed at Chia Lin. "You've really improved vastly from what you were before," added Baoyu smiling. "You verily look just as if you were my son. How very barefaced." Xueqin exclaimed as he burst out laughing. Here's a person 4 or 5 years your senior to be made your son. How far are you in your teens this year? Baoyu inquired with a smile. 18. Xueqin rejoined. This Xueqin was, in real deed, sharp and quick-witted. And when he heard Baoyu remark that he looked like his son, he readily gave a sarcastic smile and observed, the proverb is true which says, the grandfather is rocked in the cradle while the grandson leans on a staff. But though old enough in years, I'm nevertheless like a mountain, which, in spite of its height, cannot screen the sun from view. Besides, since my father's death, I've had no one to look after me, and were you, Uncle Pao, not to disdain your doltish nephew, and to acknowledge me as your son, it would be your nephew's good fortune. Have you heard what he said? Xueqin interposed cynically. But to acknowledge him as a son is no easy question to settle. And with these words he walked in. Whereupon Baoyu smilingly said, tomorrow when you have nothing to do, just come and look me up. But don't go and play any devilish pranks with them. I've just now no leisure, so come tomorrow into the library, where I'll have a chat with you for a whole day and take you into the garden for some fun. With this remark still on his lips, he laid hold of the saddle and mounted his horse. And, followed by the whole bevy of pages, he crossed over to Qiaxi's on this side, where having discovered that Qiaxi had nothing more the matter with him than a chill which he had suddenly contracted, he commenced by delivering Dowager Lady Qia's message and next paid his own obeisance. Qiaxi, at first, stood up and made suitable answer to her venerable ladyship's inquiries, and then calling a servant, take the gentleman, he said, into my lady's apartment to sit down. Baoyu withdrew out of the room and came by the back to the upper apartment. And as soon as Madame Xing caught sight of him, she, before everything else, rose to her feet and asked after old Lady Qia's health. After which, Baoyu made his own salutation, and Madame Xing drew him on to the stove couch, where she induced him to take a seat, and eventually inquired after the other inmates, and also gave orders to serve the tea. But scarcely had they had tea before they perceived Xia Sung come in to pay his respects to Baoyu. Where could one find such a living monkey as this? Madame Xing remarked. Is that nurse of yours dead and gone that she doesn't even keep you clean and tidy? And that she lets you go about with those eyebrows of yours so black and that mouth so filthy? You scarcely look like the child of a great family of scholars. While she spoke, she perceived both Chia Huan and Chia Lon, one of whom was a young uncle and the other his nephew, also advance and present their compliments, and Madame Xing bade the two of them sit down on the chairs. But when Chia Huan noticed that Baoyu sat on the same rug with Madame Xing, and that her ladyship was further caressing and petting him in every possible manner, he soon felt so very unhappy at heart, that, after sitting for a short time, he forthwith made a sign to Chia Lan that he would like to go. And as Chia Lan could not but humor him, they both got up together to take their leave. But when Baoyu perceived them rise, he too felt a wish to go back along with them. But Madame Xing remarked smilingly, you had better sit a while as I've something more to tell you, so that Baoyu had no alternative but to stay. When you get back, Madame Xing added, addressing the other two, present, each one of you, my regards to your respective mothers. The young ladies, your cousins, are all here making such a row that my head is dazed, so that I won't today keep you to have your repast here. To which Chia Huan and Chia Lan assented and quickly walked out. If it be really the case that all my cousins have come over, Baoyu ventured with a smirk, how is it that I don't see them? After sitting here for a while, Madame Xing explained, they all went at the back. But in what rooms they have gone, I don't know. My senior aunt, you said you had something to tell me, Baoyu observed. What's it, I wonder? What can there possibly be to tell you? Madame Xing laughed. It was simply to make you wait and have your repast with the young ladies and then go. But there's also a fine plaything that I'll give you to take back to amuse yourself with. These two, the aunt and her nephew, were going on with their colloquy when, much to their surprise, it was time for dinner and the young ladies were all invited to come. The tables and chairs were put in their places, and the cups and plates were arranged in proper order. And, after the mother, her daughter, and the cousins had finished their meal, Baoyu bade goodbye to Qiaxi and returned home in company with all the young ladies. And when they had said good night to Dowager Lady Chia, Madame Wang, and the others, they each went back into their rooms and retired to rest. Where we shall leave them without any further comment and speak of Chia Yun's visit to the mansion. As soon as he saw Chia Lin, he inquired what business it was that had turned up. And Chia Lin consequently explained, "The other day something did actually present itself. But as it happened that your aunt had again entreated me, I gave it to Chia Chin. As she promised me that there would be by and by in the garden several other spots where flowers and trees would be planted. And that when this job did occur she would, for a certainty, give it to you and finish." Chia Yun, upon hearing these words, suggested after a short pause, "If that be so, there's nothing for me to do than to wait." "But, uncle, you too mustn't make any allusion beforehand in the presence of aunt to my having come today to make any inquiries. For there will really be ample time to speak to her when the job turns up." "Why should I allude to it?" Chia Lin rejoined. "Have I forsooth got all this leisure to talk of irrelevant matters? But tomorrow, besides, I've got to go as far as Xingyi for a turn. And it's absolutely necessary that I should hurriedly come back the very same day. So off with you now and go and wait. And the day after tomorrow, after the watch has been set, come and ask for news. But mind at any earlier hour. I shan't have any leisure." With these words, he hastily went at the back to change his clothes. And from the time Chia Yun put his foot out of the door of the Yunkuo mansion, he was, the whole way homeward, plunged in deep thought. But having bethought himself of some expedient, he straightway wended his steps towards the house of his maternal uncle Pu Shijin. This Pu Shijin, it must be explained, kept, at the present date, a shop for the sale of spices. He had just returned home from his shop, and as soon as he noticed Chia Yun, he inquired of him what business brought him there. "There's something," Chia Yun replied, "in which I would like to crave your assistance, uncle. I'm in need of some barouse, camphor, and musk, so please, uncle, give me on credit 4 ounces of each kind. And on the festival of the 8th moon, I'll bring you the amount in full." Pu Shijin gave a sardonic smile. "Don't," he said, "again allude to any such thing as selling on tick. Some time back a partner in our establishment got several ounces of goods for his relatives on credit, and up to this date the bill hasn't as yet been settled. The result being that we've all had to make the amount good, so that we've entered into an agreement that we should no more allow anyone to obtain on tick anything on behalf of either relative or friend, and that whoever acted contrary to this resolution should be, at once, fined 20 taels, with which to stand a treat. Besides, the stock of these articles is now short, and were you also to come with ready money to this our mean shop to buy any, we wouldn't even have as much to give you. The best way, therefore, is for you to go elsewhere. This is one side of the question. For on the other, you can't have anything above board in view. And were you to obtain what you want as a loan, you would again go and play the giddy dog? But you'll simply say that on every occasion your uncle sees you, he avails himself of it to find fault with you. But a young fellow like you doesn't know what's good and what is bad. And you should, besides, make up your mind to earn a few cash, wherewith to clothe and feed yourself, so that, when I see you, I too may rejoice." "What you, uncle, say," Chia Yun rejoined smiling, "is perfectly right. The only thing is that at the time of my father's death, I was likewise so young in years that I couldn't understand anything. But later on, I heard my mother explain how that for everything, it was lucky that you, after all, my uncles, went over to our house and devised the ways and means, and managed the funeral. And is it likely you, uncle, aren't aware of these things? Besides, have I forsooth had a single acre of land or a couple of houses, the value of which I've run through as soon as it came into my hands? An ingenious wife cannot make boiled rice without raw rice. And what would you have me do? It's your good fortune, however, that you've got to deal with one such as I am. For had it been anyone else barefaced and shameless, he would have come, twice every 3 days, to worry you, uncle, by asking for 2 pints of rice and 2 of beans, and you then, uncle, would have had no help for it." "My dear child," Pu Shijin exclaimed, "had I anything that I could call my own, your uncle as I am, wouldn't I feel bound to do something for you? I've day after day mentioned to your aunt that the misfortune was that you had no resources. But should you ever succeed in making up your mind, you should go into that mighty household of yours,
And when the gentlemen aren't looking, forthwith pocket your pride and hobnob with those managers or possibly with the butlers, as you may even through them be able to get some charge or other. The other day, when I was out of town, I came across that old Quartus of the third branch of the family, astride of a tall donkey, at the head of 4 or 5 carriages, in which were about 40 to 50 bonzes and Taoist priests on their way to the family fane, and that man can't lack brains for such a charge to have fallen to his share. Chia Yun, upon hearing these words, indulged in a long and revolting rigmarole, and then got up to take his leave. "What are you in such a hurry for?" Pu Shijin remarked. "Have your meal and then go." But this remark was scarcely ended when they heard his wife say, "Are you again in the clouds?" When I heard that there was no rice, I bought half a caddy of dry rice paste, and brought it here for you to eat. And do you pray now still put on the airs of a well-to-do, and keep your nephew to feel the pangs of hunger? Well, then, buy half a caddy more, and add to what there is. That's all," Pu Shijin continued. Whereupon her mother explained to her daughter Yin Chi, "Go over to Mrs. Wang's opposite and ask her if she has any cash, to lend us 20 or 30 of them. And tomorrow, when they're brought over, we'll repay her." But while the husband and wife were carrying on this conversation, Chia Yun had, at an early period, repeated several times, "There's no need to go to this trouble," and off he went, leaving no trace or shadow behind. But without passing any further remarks on the husband and wife of the Pu family, we will now confine ourselves to Chia Yun. Having gone in high dudgeon out of the door of his uncle's house, he started straight on his way back home. But while distressed in mind, and preoccupied with his thoughts, he paced on with drooping head, he unexpectedly came into collision with a drunken fellow, who gripped Chia Yun, and began to abuse him, crying, "Are your eyes gone blind that you come bang against me?" The tone of voice when it reached Chia Yun's ears sounded like that of someone with whom he was intimate, and on careful scrutiny he found that it was his next-door neighbor, near her. This near her was a dissolute knave whose only idea was to give out money at heavy rates of interest and to have his meals in the gambling dens. His sole delight was to drink and to fight. He was, at this very moment, coming back home from the house of a creditor whom he had dunned, and was already far gone with drink, so that when, at an unforeseen moment, Chia Yun ran against him, he meant there and then to start a scuffle with him. "Old Chia Yun shouted. "Stay your hand! It's I who have hustled against you." As soon as Ni-er heard the tone of his voice, he opened wide his drunken eyes and gave him a look. And realizing that it was Chia Yun, he hastened to loosen his grasp and to remark with a smile, as he staggered about, "Is it you indeed, Master Chia Secundus? Where were you off to now? I couldn't tell you." Chia Yun rejoined, "I've again brought displeasure upon me, and all through no fault of mine." "Never mind," urged Ni-er. "If you're in any trouble, you just tell me, and I'll give vent to your spite for you. For in these 3 streets and 6 lanes, no matter who may give offense to any neighbors of mine, of me, Ni-er, the drunken Chin Kang, I'll wager that I compel that man's family to disperse, and his home to break up." "Old Danai, don't lose your temper," Chia Yun protested. "But listen and let me tell you what happened." After which, he went on to tell Ni-er the whole affair with Pu Shijin. As soon as Ni-er heard him, he got into a frightful rage. "Were he not," he shouted, "a relative of yours, Master Secundus, I would readily give him a bit of my mind." Really, resentment will stifle my breath, but never mind. You needn't, however, distress yourself. I've got here a few tales ready at hand which, if you require, don't scruple to take. And from such good neighbors as you are, I won't ask any interest upon this money." With this remark still on his lips, he produced from his pouch a bundle of silver. Ni-er has, it is true, ever been a rogue, Chia Yun reflected in his own mind. But as he is regulated in his dealings by a due regard to persons, he enjoys to a great degree the reputation of generosity. And were I today not to accept this favor of his, he'll, I fear, be put to shame. And it won't contrariwise be nice on my part. And isn't it better that I should make use of his money, and by I can repay him double and things will be all right? "Old her," he therefore observed aloud with a smile, "you're really a fine fellow. And as you've shown me such eminent consideration, how can I presume not to accept your offer?
On my return home, I'll write the customary IOU and send it to you, and all will be in order. Nier gave a broad grin. It's only 15 taels and 3 mace, he answered. And if you insist upon writing an IOU, I won't then lend it to you. Chia Yun at these words took over the money, smiling the while. I'll readily, he retorted, comply with your wishes and have done. For what's the use of exasperating you? Well then that will be all right, Nier laughed. But the day is getting dark, and I shan't ask you to have a cup of tea or stand you a drink, for I've some small things more to settle. As for me, I'm going over there, but you, after all, should please wend your way homewards. And I shall also request you to take a message for me to my people. Tell them to close the doors and turn in, as I'm not returning home. And that in the event of anything occurring, to bid our daughter come over tomorrow, as soon as it is daylight, to short-legged Wang's house, the horse dealer's, in search of me. And as he uttered this remark he walked away, stumbling and hobbling along. But we will leave him without further notice and allude to Chia Yun. He had, at quite an unexpected juncture, met this piece of luck, so that his heart was, of course, delighted to the utmost degree. This Nyir, he mused, is really a good enough sort of fellow. But what I dread is that he may have been open-handed in his fit of drunkenness, and that he mayn't, by and by, ask for his money to be paid twice over. And what will I do then? Never mind. He suddenly went on to ponder. When that job has become an accomplished fact, I shall even have the means to pay him back double the original amount. Prompted by this resolution, he came over to a money shop, and when he had the silver weighed, and no discrepancy was discovered in the weight, he was still more elated at heart. And on his way back, he first and foremost delivered Nyir's message to his wife, and then returned to his own home, where he found his mother seated all alone on a stove couch spinning thread. As soon as she saw him enter, she inquired where he had been the whole day long, in reply to which Chia Yun, fearing lest his parents should be angry, forthwith made no allusion to what transpired with Pu Shijin, but simply explained that he had been in the Western Mansion, waiting for his uncle Secundus Lean. This over, he asked his mother whether she had had her meal or not, and his parents said by way of reply, I've had it, but I've kept something for you in there. And calling to the servant maid, she bade her bring it round, and set it before him to eat. But as it was already dark, when the lamps had to be lit, Chia Yun, after partaking of his meal, got ready and turned in. Nothing of any notice transpired the whole night. But the next day, as soon as it was dawn, he got up, washed his face, and came to the main street, outside the south gate, and purchasing some musk from a perfumery shop, he with rapid stride entered the Yunkuo mansion. And having, as a result of his inquiries, found out that Chia Lin had gone out of doors, Chia Yun readily betook himself to the back, in front of the door of Chia Lin's court, where he saw several servant lads, with immense brooms in their hands, engaged in that place in sweeping the court. But as he suddenly caught sight of Shu Jui's wife appear outside the door, and call out to the young boys, Don't sweep now, Our Lady is coming out. Chia Yun eagerly walked up to her and inquired, with a face beaming with smiles, Where's Aunt Secunda going to? To this inquiry, Shu Jui's wife explained, Our old lady has sent for her, and I expect it must be for her to cut some piece of cloth or other. But while she yet spoke, they perceived a whole bevy of people, pressing round Lady Feng, as she egressed from the apartment. Chia Yun was perfectly aware that Lady Feng took pleasure in flattery, and delighted in display, so that hastily dropping his arms, he with all reverence, thrust himself forward and paid his respects to her. But Lady Feng did not even so much as turn to look at him with straight eyes, but continued, as hitherto, her way onwards, simply confining herself to ascertaining whether his mother was all right, and adding, How is it that she doesn't come to our house for a stroll? The thing is, Chia Yun replied, that she's not well. She, however, often thinks fondly of you, aunt, and longs to see you. But as for coming round, she's quite unable to do so. You have, indeed, the knack of telling lies. Lady Feng laughed with irony. For hadn't I alluded to her, she would never have thought of me. Isn't your nephew afraid? Chia Yun protested smilingly, of being blasted by lightning to have the audacity of telling lies in the presence of an elder. Even so late as yesterday evening she alluded to you, aunt.
Though naturally, she said, of a weak constitution, you had, however, plenty to attend to. That it's thanks to your supremely eminent energies, aunt, that you're, after all, able to manage everything in such a perfect manner. And that had you ever made the slightest slip, there would have long ago crept up, goodness knows, what troubles.
As soon as Lady Feng heard these words, her whole face beamed with smiles, and she unconsciously halted her steps, while she proceeded to ask,
how is it that, both your mother and yourself, cattle about me behind my back, without rhyme or reason?
There's a reason for it, Chia Yun observed, which is simply this. I've an excellent friend with considerable money of his own at home who recently kept a perfumery shop. But as he obtained, by purchase, the rank of deputy sub-prefect, he was, the other day,
selected for a post in Yunnan, in some prefecture or other unknown to me, whither he has gone together with his family.
He even closed this shop of his, and forthwith collecting all his wares, he gave away what he could give away, and what he had to sell at a discount was sold at a loss. While such valuable articles as these were all presented to relatives or friends.
And that's why it is that I came in for some barouse, camphor, and musk.
But I, at the time, deliberated with my mother that to sell them below their price would be a pity.
And that, if we wished to give them as a present to anyone, there was no one good enough to use such perfumes.
But remembering how you, aunt, had all along in years gone by, even to this day, to spend large bundles of silver in purchasing such articles, and how, not to speak of this year with an imperial consort in the palace, what's even required for this dragon boat festival will also necessitate the addition of 100 times as much as the quantity of previous years. I therefore present them to you, aunt, as a token of my esteem. With these words still on his lips, he simultaneously produced an ornamented box, which he handed over to her. And as Lady Feng was, at this time, making preparations for presents for the occasion of the Dragon Boat Festival,
for which perfumes were obligatory, she, with all promptitude, directed Feng He, receive Mr. Yun's present and take it home and hand it over to Ping Er.
To one, she consequently added, who seems to me so full of discrimination. It isn't a wonder that your uncle is repeatedly alluding, and that he speaks highly of you. How that you talk with all intelligence, and that you have experience stored up in your mind. Chia Yun, upon hearing this propitious language, hastily drew near one step, and designedly asked, does really uncle often refer to me? The moment Lady Feng caught this question, she was at once inclined to tell him all about the charge to be entrusted to him, but on second thought, she again felt apprehensive lest she should be looked lightly upon by him, by simply insinuating that she had promptly and needlessly promised him something to do, so soon as she got a little scented ware. And this consideration urged her to once more restrain her tongue, so that she never made the slightest reference even to so much as one word about his having been chosen to look after the works of planting the flowers and trees. And after confining herself to making the first few irrelevant remarks which came to her lips, she hastily betook herself into Dowager Lady Chia's apartments. Chia Yun himself did not feel as if he could very well advert to the subject, with the result that he had no alternative but to retrace his steps homewards. But as when he had seen Baoyu the previous day, he had asked him to go into the outer library and wait for him. He therefore finished his meal, and then once again entered the mansion and came over into the Aixia study, situated outside the ceremonial gate, over at old Lady Chia's part of the compound, where he discovered the two lads Ming Yale, whose name had been changed into Pei Ming, and Sihu Yu playing at chess and just arguing about the capture of a castle. And besides them, Yin Chuan, Sao Hua, Tiao Yun, Pan Ho, these 4 or 5 of them, up to larks, stealing the young birds from the nests under the eaves of the house. As soon as Chia Yun entered the court, he stamped his foot and shouted, "The monkeys are up to mischief! Here I am! I've come!" And when the company of servant boys perceived him, they one and all promptly dispersed. While Chia Yun walked into the library, and seating himself at once in a chair, he inquired, "Has your master secundus, Mr. Pao, come down?" "He hasn't been down here at all today," Pei Ming replied. "But if you, Mr. Secundus, have anything to tell him, I'll go and see what he's up to for you." Saying this, he there and then left the room. And Chia Yun meanwhile gave himself to the inspection of the pictures and knickknacks. But some considerable time elapsed, and yet he did not see him arrive. And noticing besides that the other lads had all gone to romp, he was just plunged in a state of despondency, when he heard outside the door a voice cry out, with winning tone and tender accents, "My elder brother!" Chia Yun looked out, and saw that it was a servant maid of 15 or 16, who was indeed extremely winsome and spruce. As soon, however, as the maid caught a glimpse of Chia Yun, she speedily turned herself round and withdrew out of sight. But, as luck would have it, it happened that Pei Ming was coming along, and seeing the servant maid in front of the door, he observed, "Welcome, welcome." I was quite at a loss how to get any news of Baoyu. And as Chia Yun discerned Pei Ming, he hastily too ran out in pursuit of him, and ascertained what was up. Whereupon Pei Ming returned for answer, "I waited a whole day long, and not a single soul came over. But this girl is attached to Master Secundus, Mr. Pao's rooms. And, my dear girl," he consequently went on to say, "go in and take a message. Say that Mr. Secundus, who lives under the portico, has come." The servant maid, upon hearing these words, knew at once that he was a young gentleman belonging to the family in which she served, and she did not skulk out of sight, as she had done in the first instance. But with a gaze sufficient to kill, she fixed her two eyes upon Chia Yun. When she heard Chia Yun interpose, "What about over the portico and under the portico?" "You just tell him that Yun heir has come, that's all." After a while this girl gave a sarcastic smile. "My idea is," she ventured, "that you, Master Secundus, should really, if it so please you, go back and come again tomorrow. And tonight, if I find time, I'll just put in a word with him." "What's this that you're driving at?" Pei Ming then shouted. And the maid rejoined, "He's not even had a siesta today, so that he'll have his dinner at an early hour, and won't come down again in the evening. And is it likely that you would have Master Secundus wait here and suffer hunger? And isn't it better than he should return home? The right thing is that he should come tomorrow. For were even by and by someone to turn up, who could take a message, that person would simply acquiesce with the lips, but would he be willing to deliver the message in for you?" Chia Yun, upon finding how concise and yet how well expressed this girl's remarks had been, was bent upon inquiring what her name was. But as she was a maid employed in Baoyu's apartments, he did not therefore feel justified in asking the question, and he had no other course but to add, "What you say is quite right, I'll come tomorrow." And as he spoke, he there and then was making his way outside, when Pei Ming remarked, "I'll go and pour a cup of tea. And Master Secundus, have your tea and then go." Chia Yun turned his head round, as he kept on his way, and said by way of rejoinder, "I won't have any tea, for I've besides something more to attend to." And while with his lips he uttered these words, he, with his eyes, stared at the servant girl, who was still standing in there. Chia Yun wended his steps straightway home. And the next day, he came to the front entrance, where, by a strange coincidence, he met Lady Feng on her way to the opposite side to pay her respects. She had just mounted her carriage, but perceiving Chia Yun arrive, she eagerly bade a servant stop him, and, with the window between them, she smiled and observed, "You're indeed bold in playing your pranks with me. I thought it strange that you should give me presents. But the fact is you had a favor to ask of me. And your uncle told me even yesterday that you had appealed to him." Chia Yun smiled. "Of my appeal to uncle, you needn't, aunt, make any mention, for I'm at this moment full of regret at having made it. Had I known, at an early hour, that things would have come to this pass, I would, from the very first, have made my request to you, aunt. And by this time everything would have been settled long ago. But who would have anticipated that uncle was, after all, a man of no worth?" "Strange enough," Lady Feng remarked sneeringly. "When you found that you didn't succeed in that quarter, you came again yesterday in search of me." "Aunt, you do my filial heart an injustice," Chia Yun protested. "I never had such a thought. Had I entertained any such idea, wouldn't I, aunt, have made my appeal to you yesterday? But as you are now aware of everything, I'll really put uncle on one side, and prefer my request to you. For circumstances compel me to entreat you, aunt, to be so good as to show me some little consideration,
Lady Feng laughed sardonically.
You people will choose the long road to follow and put me also in a dilemma.
Had you told me just one word at an early hour, what couldn't have been brought about? An affair of state indeed to be delayed up to this moment. In the garden, there are to be more trees planted and flowers laid down. And I couldn't think of any person that I could have recommended. And had you spoken before this, wouldn't the whole question have been settled soon enough?
Well, in that case, Aunt, ventured Chia Yun with a smile, you had better depute me tomorrow and have done. This job, continued Lady Feng after a pause, is not, my impression is, very profitable.
And if you were to wait till the first moon of next year, when the fireworks, lanterns, and candles will have to be purveyed, I'll depute you as soon as those extensive commissions turn up.
My dear aunt,
pleaded Chia Yun, first appoint me to this one. And if I do really manage this satisfactorily, you can then commission me with that other.
You know in truth how to draw a long thread, Lady Feng observed laughing. But hadn't it been that your uncle had spoken to me on your account, I wouldn't have concerned myself about you.
But as I shall cross over here soon after the repast, you had better come at 11 a.m. and fetch the money, for you to enter into the garden the day after tomorrow and have the flowers planted. As she said this, she gave orders to drive the scented carriage and went on her way by the quickest cut.
While Chia Yun, who was irrepressibly delighted, betook himself into the Aishia study and inquired after Baoyu.
But who would have thought it? Baoyu had, at an early hour, gone to the mansion of the Prince of Peiqing, so that Chia Yun had to sit in a listless mood till noon.
And when he found out that Lady Feng had returned, he speedily wrote an acknowledgment and came to receive the warrant.
On his arrival outside the court, he commissioned a servant to announce him, and Tsai Ming thereupon walked out, and merely asking for the receipt, went in, and after filling in the amount, the year and moon, he handed it over to Chia Yun together with the warrant.
Chia Yun received them from him, and as the entry consisted of 200 taels, his heart was full of exultant joy.
And turning round, he hurried to the treasury, where after he had taken over the amount in silver, he returned home and laid the case before his mother, and needless to say that both the parent and her son were in high spirits.
The next day, at the 5th watch, Chia Yun first came in search of Nair, to whom he repaid the money,
and then taking 50 taels along with him, he sped outside the western gate to the house of Fang Chin, a gardener, to purchase trees, where we will leave him without saying anything more about him.
We will now resume our story with Baoyu.
The day on which he encountered Chia Yun, he asked him to come in on the morrow and have a chat with him. But this invitation was practically the mere formal talk of a rich and well-to-do young man, and was not likely to be so much as borne in mind. And so it was that it readily slipped from his memory.
On the evening of the day, however, on which he returned home from the mansion of the Prince Peiqing, he came after paying his salutations to Dowager Lady Chia, Madame Wang, and the other inmates, back into the garden.
But upon divesting himself of all his fineries, he was just about to have his bath when, as Shi Jin had, at the invitation of Shu Paoxiche, I crossed over to tie a few knotted buttons, as Qin Wen and Pai Hen had both gone to hurry the servants to bring the water, as Tan Yun had likewise been taken home on account of her mother's illness, and Shi Yue, on the other hand, was at present ailing in her quarters, while the several waiting maids, who were in there besides to attend to the dirty work and answer the calls, had, surmising that he would not requisition their services, one and all gone out in search of their friends and in quest of their companions. It occurred, contrary to their calculations, that Baoyu remained this whole length of time quite alone in his apartments. And as it so happened that Baoyu wanted tea to drink, he had to call 2 or 3 times before he at last saw 3 old matrons walk in. But at the sight of them, Baoyu hastily waved his hand and exclaimed, "No matter, no matter. I don't want you." Whereupon the matrons had no help but to withdraw out of the rooms. And as Baoyu perceived that there were no waiting maids at hand, he had to come down and take a cup and go up to the teapot to pour the tea. When he heard someone from behind him observe, "Master Secundus, beware, you'll scorch your hand. Wait until I come to pour it." And as she spoke, she walked up to him, and took the cup from his grasp, to the intense surprise, in fact, of Baoyu, who inquired, Where were you that you have suddenly come to give me a start?
The waiting maid smiled as she handed him the tea. I was in the back court, she replied, and just came in from the back door of the inner rooms.
And is it likely that you didn't, sir, hear the sound of my footsteps?
Baoyu drank his tea, and as he simultaneously passed the servant girl under a minute inspection, he found that though she wore several articles of clothing the worse for wear, she was, nevertheless, with that head of beautiful hair, as black as the plumage of a raven, done up in curls, her face so oblong, her figure so slim and elegant, indeed, supremely beautiful, sweet and spruce, and Baoyu eagerly inquired, "Are you also a girl attached to this room of mine?"
"I am,"
rejoined that waiting maid. "But since you belong to this room, how is it I don't know you?" Baoyu added. When the maid heard these words, she forced a laugh. "There are even many," she explained, "that are strangers to you."
"And is it only myself?"
"I've never before this served tea or handed water or brought in anything.
Nor have I attended to a single duty in your presence, so how could you know me?"
"But why don't you attend to any of those duties that would bring you to my notice?" Bao-Chiau. "I too," answered the maid, "find it as difficult to answer such a question.
There's however one thing that I must report to you, Master Secundus. Yesterday, some Mr. Yun or other came to see you.
But as I thought you, sir, had no leisure, I speedily bade Pei Ming tell him to come early today."
"But you unexpectedly went over again to the mansion of the Prince of Peiqing. When she had spoken as far as this,
she caught sight of Chu Wen and Pai Hen enter the court, giggling and laughing, the two of them carrying between them a bucket of water. And while raising their skirts with one hand, they hobbled along, as the water spurted and plashed. The waiting maid hastily come out to meet them so as to relieve them of their burden. But Chu Wen and Pai Hen were in the act of standing face to face and finding fault with each other. One saying, "You've wetted my clothes," the other adding, "You've trod on my shoes," and upon all of a sudden, espying someone walk out to receive the water and discovering, when they came to see, that it was actually no one else than Xiao Heng, they were at once both so taken aback that, putting down the bucket, they hurried into the room.
And when they looked about and saw that there was no other person inside besides Baoyu, they were at once displeased. But as they were meanwhile compelled to get ready the articles necessary for his bath, they waited until Baoyu was about to divest himself of his clothes, when the couple of them speedily pulled the door to behind them, as they went out, and walked as far as the room on the opposite side, in search of Xiao Heng, of whom they inquired, "What were you doing in his room a short while back?"
"When was I ever in the room?" Xiao Heng replied. "Simply because I lost sight of my handkerchief, I went to the back to try and find it,
when unexpectedly Mr. Secundus, who wanted tea, called for you sisters.
And as there wasn't one even of you there, I walked in and poured a cup for him, and just at that very moment you sisters came back." "You bare-faced low-bred thing!" cried Chu Wen, turning towards her and spurting in her face. "It was our bounden duty to tell you to go and hurry them for the water, but you simply maintained that you were busy and made us go instead,
in order to afford you an opportunity of performing these wily tricks. And isn't this raising yourself up lie by lie? But don't we forsooth even so much as come up to you? And you just take that looking glass and see for yourself, whether you be fit to serve tea and to hand water or not?"
"Tomorrow," continued Pai here, "I'll tell them that whenever there's anything to do connected with his wanting tea or asking for water,
or with fetching things for him, not one of us should budge, and that she alone should be allowed to go and have done."
"If this be your suggestion," remarked Chu Wen, "wouldn't it be still better that we should all disperse and let her reign supreme in this room?" But while the two of them were up to this trouble, one saying one thing, and another, they caught sight of two old nurses walk in to deliver a message from Lady Feng, who explained, "Tomorrow, someone will bring in gardeners to plant trees,
and she bids you keep under more rigorous restraint, and not sun your clothes and petticoats anywhere and everywhere, nor air them about heedlessly.
That the artificial hill will, all along, be entirely shut in by screening curtains, and that you mustn't he running about at random." "I wonder," interposed Chu Wen with alacrity, "who it is that will bring the workmen tomorrow and supervise the works." "Someone or other called Mr. Yun, living at the back portico," the old woman observed. But Chu Wen and Pai Hen were neither of them acquainted with him, and they went on promiscuously asking further questions on his account. But Xiao Heng knew distinctly in her mind who it was, and was well aware that it was the person whom she had seen the previous day in the outer library. The surname of this Xiao Heng had in fact been originally Lin, while her infant name had been Heng Wai. But as the word Yu improperly corresponded with the names of Baoyu and Daiyu, she was in due course simply called Xiao Heng. She was indeed an hereditary servant of the mansion, and her father had latterly taken over the charge of all matters connected with the farms and farmhouses in every locality. This Heng Yu came, at the age of 16, into the mansion, to enter into service, and was attached to the Heng Yuan, where in point of fact she found both a quiet and pleasant home. And when contrary to all expectation, the young ladies as well as Baoyu were subsequently permitted to move their quarters into the garden of Broad Vista, it so happened that this place was, moreover, fixed upon by Baoyu. This Xiao Heng was, it is true, a girl without any experience, but as she could, to a certain degree, boast of a pretty face, and as in her own heart, she recklessly fostered the idea of exalting herself to a higher standard, she was ever ready to thrust herself in Pao Zuo's way with a view to showing herself off. But attached to Pao Zuo's personal service were a lot of servants, all of whom were glib and specious, so that how could she ever find an opportunity of thrusting herself forward? But contrary to her anticipations, there turned up, eventually on this day, some faint glimmer of hope, but as she again came in for a spell of spiteful abuse from Chu Wen and her companion, her expectations were soon considerably frustrated, and she was just plunged in a melancholy mood, when suddenly she heard the old nurse begin the conversation about Chia Yun, which unconsciously so affected her heart that she hastily returned, quite disconsolate, into her room, and lay herself down on her bed, giving herself quietly to reflection. But while she was racking and torturing her brain, and at a moment when she was at a loss what decision to grasp, her ear unexpectedly caught, emanating from outside the window, a faint voice say, "Xiao Heng, I've picked up your pocket handkerchief in here." And as soon as Xiao Heng heard these words, she walked out with hurried step, and found that it was no one else than Chia Yun in person. And as Xiao Heng unwillingly felt her powdered face suffused with brushes, "Where did you pick it up, Mr. Secundus?" she asked. "Come over," Chia Yun smiled, "and I'll tell you." And as he uttered these words, he came up and drew her to him. But Xiao Heng twisted herself round and ran away, but was however tripped over by the step of the door. Now reader, do you want to know the sequel? If so, the next chapter will explain.
Thanks for watching. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel for more excellent content.